What happens when a man who built an empire on grit and resilience walks into what should be a friendly conversation, only to find himself in a carefully laid trap? When Sylvester Stallone, the icon who taught millions that victory isn't about how hard you hit, but how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, stepped onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage that autumn night, no one expected they were about to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a masterclass in dignity under fire, a battle between respect and ridicule, and ultimately, a moment that reminded the world why some legends can never be broken. The studio buzzed with anticipation as the house band's final notes faded into the Los Angeles night. Stage lights bathed the set in that familiar warm glow that's become synonymous with casual celebrity chat and easy laughs. The audience settled into their seats, programs clutched in hands, phones silenced, ready for another entertaining evening of Hollywood banter. They expected the usual formula: softball questions, rehearsed anecdotes, a plug for the latest project, maybe a funny clip or two. What they were about to witness would shatter every expectation they'd brought through those studio doors. Jimmy Kimmel bounded onto the stage with the confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. His signature grin was wide and welcoming, his movements choreographed by years of practiced ease. "Tonight," he announced, his voice carrying that familiar blend of enthusiasm and irony that's become his trademark, "we have a very special guest. The man who made mumbling an art form. Rocky himself, Sylvester Stallone." The crowd erupted, but there was something in Jimmy's tone, something almost imperceptible to those who didn't know what to listen for. A slight edge, a hint of sharpness wrapped in humor's clothing. Stallone emerged from backstage, and the applause intensified. At 78, he still commanded attention the moment he entered a room. Dressed impeccably in a sharp black blazer over a deep maroon shirt that caught the stage lights perfectly, he moved with that distinctive combination of power and grace that only comes from decades of physical discipline. This wasn't just another aging actor clinging to past glory. This was a man who'd fought his way up from sleeping in bus stations to becoming a global phenomenon, and every step he took carried that history. He waved to the audience, his smile polite but reserved, his eyes already reading the room with the instinct of someone who'd learned long ago to recognize danger before it fully revealed itself. Those who knew Stallone's story, who understood the battles he'd fought both on and off screen, might have noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw set just slightly tighter than usual. But to most, he was simply the gracious celebrity, grateful for the applause and settling into the guest chair beside his host. "It's good to be here," Stallone said, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly tone that's become as iconic as the characters he's portrayed. Jimmy leaned forward, his posture friendly, open, disarming. "Good to have you, Sly," he replied, and then, almost as an afterthought, added with a grin, "I was told you'd be bringing wisdom, experience, a few unintelligible syllables, and maybe a protein shake." The audience laughed, a ripple of amusement that seemed innocent enough on the surface. Stallone chuckled, but for those paying attention, his eyes told a different story. They narrowed just fractionally. "Well, I left the protein shake backstage," he said lightly. "Didn't want to outshine your green juice." Jimmy smirked, clearly pleased with the comeback. "Touché." He settled in, expecting an easy evening of trading barbs with a good-natured guest. But the man sitting across from him had spent a lifetime in far more hostile territory than a late-night set. And every instinct honed in those experiences was already being activated. The conversation seemed to flow naturally at first. Jimmy asked about Stallone's latest film, another action project that brought him back to familiar territory. "So, let's talk about your new movie," Jimmy said, his tone carrying just a hint of condescension. "Another action flick?" Or did you finally decide to make something with a plot? The audience laughed again, but the sound was uncertain now. Something was shifting in the air. Stallone's expression remained calm, his decades of acting experience serving him well. "It's a story about redemption," he explained, his voice steady and composed. "A veteran confronting the ghosts of his past, something that speaks to real-world pain." "Deep," Jimmy responded with mock awe, his eyes glittering with what he clearly thought was harmless teasing. "And here I thought it was just another reason to flex those biceps on screen." More laughter, thinner this time, hesitant. Some audience members shifted in their seats, sensing something unspoken between the two men. Stallone didn't laugh. His tone hardened just slightly as he replied, "Sometimes pain needs muscle." The air in the studio grew heavier. Jimmy leaned back, still amused, thinking he was winning the exchange. "Wow, that's poetic," he said with theatrical appreciation. "Did Rambo teach you that, or was it Rocky?" Stallone leaned back, mirroring Jimmy's posture but radiating an entirely different kind of energy. "Funny," he said quietly. "I always thought comedy should punch up, not down." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jimmy's eyebrows rose, genuine surprise flickering across his face before his professional mask slipped back into place. "Just having fun," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Don't want to get body slammed on live TV." "Don't worry," Stallone replied, his voice carrying a sharp edge. "I only hit when it's scripted." The tension in the room was unmistakable now. The studio audience, used to light-hearted banter, suddenly found themselves in unfamiliar territory. This wasn't the comfortable rhythm of late-night chatter. They were witnessing something raw, something real. Behind the cameras, crew members exchanged uneasy glances. The control room producer leaned forward, pulse quickening. This was either going to be television gold or a complete disaster. Sensing the need to regain control, Jimmy tried to steer the conversation to safer ground. "Well, let's go back," he said, feigning generosity. "The first Rocky film, you wrote it in 3 days, right? Did you just run out of crayons?" The joke landed wrong. The audience stirred uncomfortably. Nervous laughter trickled through the studio, but most people stayed silent. A line had been crossed between playful teasing and real disrespect. Stallone paused. The silence stretched just long enough to make everyone uneasy. "I wrote it with everything I had," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning, "while sleeping in a bus terminal trying to sell my dog to eat. So yeah, crayons weren't really the priority." The room went completely still. Jimmy's face flickered between regret and calculation. He knew he'd pushed too far. Leaning forward now, Stallone's tone shifted from defensive to commanding. "You know, Jimmy," he said evenly, "sometimes you crack jokes. Sometimes you crack dignity. Be careful what you're breaking tonight." The atmosphere was electric. What began as a routine interview had turned into something far more real and far more dangerous. Jimmy tried to reclaim his footing, masking discomfort with charm. "You know, Sly, you should do stand-up." That comeback was almost intelligible. The word almost hit like a jab, mocking Stallone's speech. Stallone didn't flinch. His expression remained calm, but his eyes had gone cold. "And you should try sincerity sometime," he said quietly. "It might shock your audience." A collective ooh rippled through the crowd. They felt the shift in power. Jimmy was no longer in control. Some audience members leaned forward, hungry for more. Others shifted uneasily, sensing that they were witnessing something unscripted, something real. Jimmy kept pressing, unwilling to back down. "Let's be honest," he said, his tone sharp. "You've made more sequels than Hollywood has original ideas. Ever think of just letting it go?" Stallone crossed his legs slowly, deliberately. "I keep telling stories people want to hear," he said steadily. "Maybe that's the part that bothers you." Jimmy chuckled, but it sounded forced. Or maybe it's that you keep playing the same guy with a new haircut. Stallone shot back instantly. Better than being a new haircut with the same jokes. The audience erupted in genuine laughter and applause. They'd chosen their side, and it wasn't the host's. Jimmy forced a smile. "Okay, touche," he said, pretending to laugh it off while plotting his next move. "But seriously, isn't there a part of you that worries people only see you as a punchline?" Stallone leaned in, his voice steady and powerful. "Only when hosts like you try to write the jokes." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "Let me remind you, Rocky wasn't just a film. It was hope for a lot of people who had none." The entire room shifted. The applause that followed wasn't just for a clever line, it was for truth. Stallone had reminded everyone why his story mattered, why Rocky mattered, and why, even decades later, he still commanded respect. The moment had shifted into something deeper, something about meaning, about the stories we tell ourselves to survive, about the characters that become part of our lives and help us through our darkest moments. Jimmy tried to reclaim control, but he was floundering, reaching for ammunition that kept misfiring. "But you're a millionaire now, right?" he asked, his tone laced with a hint of desperation disguised as humor. "Don't you think it's a bit rich talking about struggle?" Stallone's voice deepened, his words cutting through the studio air like a blade. "Struggle doesn't expire with a paycheck," he said. And in that one sentence was an entire lifetime. Years of fighting through poverty, rejection, and failure, of holding on to dignity when the world insisted he didn't deserve it. "It leaves scars," he continued softly, "and it teaches you to recognize when you're being used for someone else's punchline." The silence that followed was profound. Jimmy froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. "You think I'm using you?" he finally asked, his voice quieter now. For the first time that night, something real slipping through the cracks. Stallone didn't blink. "You tell me." The audience held its breath. Camera operators adjusted their frames instinctively, sensing they were capturing a moment that would live far beyond that broadcast. In the control room, the director whispered urgently into headsets, torn between panic and awe. But ultimately, no one dared to cut away. Jimmy looked visibly uncomfortable now. His laugh came out brittle, the sound of someone trying to claw their way back to safety. "Well, folks," he said, glancing toward the audience, "I didn't realize we booked a philosophy major tonight." Stallone smiled, a thin, humorless smile. "Funny," he said. "I thought we booked a host." The studio erupted, not with laughter, but with applause. Real, thunderous applause. The crowd had chosen a side, and it wasn't Jimmy's. He clenched his jaw, struggling to maintain composure, but everyone could see it. He was no longer in control. He tried again, scrambling for a question that might put Stallone back on the defensive. "So how do you respond to critics who say your career is just nostalgia now, that without the past, you're not much in the present?" Stallone leaned forward slightly, his tone now colder, sharper. "Critics talk," he said. "Legends work. And I don't need to relive the past. I built it." The studio exploded with applause. This wasn't polite appreciation anymore. It was respect, raw, genuine, earned. Some people stood, unable to contain their admiration. Stallone hadn't just defended himself. He'd reminded everyone in the room who he truly was. Jimmy leaned in for one last attempt at control. "Come on, Sly," he said, trying to sound light-hearted again. "Can't you take a joke?" Stallone's smile vanished. His eyes hardened. "Can you take the truth?" The silence that followed was absolute. You could feel it in every corner of the studio. A heavy, electric stillness that made people aware of their own breathing. It was the kind of silence that marks a turning point. Jimmy looked at the camera, forcing a grin that no longer reached his eyes. "We'll be right back after this short break," he said tightly. "If Stallone doesn't punch me before then." The audience laughed uncertainly, but everyone knew the truth. This wasn't a break. It was a retreat. As the cameras cut to commercial, the tension didn't fade. It hung thick in the air, buzzing through the studio. Crew members whispered. Makeup artists rushed to touch up Jimmy's face, and Stallone sat still, unshaken, declining water with a polite shake of his head. The audience murmured among themselves, realizing they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. On social media, clips were already spreading like wildfire. When the lights snapped back on, Jimmy adjusted his jacket, his practiced grin returning like armor. "We're back with the one and only Sylvester Stallone," he announced, his tone overly bright. Voice of a generation, the man, the myth, what is it now? 80-some-year-old action figure? The audience laughed, but it was scattered, hesitant. They'd seen what happened the last time he tried this. Stallone waited for the laughter to fade. Then, calmly, he replied, "Better to be molded in stone than made of plastic, Jimmy." The room exploded. The cheers were louder this time, more confident. The shift was complete. The audience no longer saw Stallone as a guest. They saw him as the victor, and Jimmy knew it. The applause rolled past him, bypassing the host completely, and settled squarely on the man who had just turned a late-night stage into his own ring. And won.